The Fall of Sri Lanka, How a Nation Defaulted. ***, midnight to 0:30, ***. For $1 billion. That's how much India had to lend Sri Lanka just to keep the country from collapsing entirely in 2022. But here's what makes that number so damning: even with that emergency lifeline, Sri Lanka still defaulted on its foreign debt. The first sovereign default, that means a country officially can't pay what it owes, in Sri Lanka's 74-year history. And it didn't happen because of war, natural disaster, or invasion. It happened because of decisions made in air-conditioned offices by people who are still walking free. ***, 0:30 to 2:15, ***. Let's build the timeline. March 2022. Sri Lanka's foreign exchange reserves, the emergency cash a country keeps to pay international debts, stood at $1.9 billion. That same year, $8.6 billion in payments were due: bonds to foreign lenders, interest on loans, essential imports. The math doesn't work. By April 2022, the government officially announced default. But this didn't start in 2022. To find where it really began, you have to go back to 2015. A new government took power under Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. The Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka had already warned them: the economy is fragile, debt is climbing, foreign reserves are thin. The warnings were specific, documented, and ignored. Here's what happened instead: ***, tax cuts. ***, the government slashed corporate taxes and income taxes, money the government needs to operate. In a country already running on fumes, you don't cut revenue. You increase it. Then came the freebies. Election-related spending, subsidies, welfare payments, direct handouts, designed to win votes, not to build an economy. The finance minister at the time, Ravi Karunanak, pushed practices that even international observers considered reckless. Then the central bank did something even more dangerous: ***, they printed money. ***, not metaphorically. They literally expanded the money supply without the economic growth to back it up. More money chasing the same goods means one thing: inflation. By 2022, Sri Lankans were paying 3 times what they paid the year before for basic food. A dozen eggs cost the equivalent of a day's wages for some workers. In April 2021, we know this now from reporting, a second shock hit. The government announced a nationwide shift to organic farming. Overnight. No transition period, no planning. Farmers couldn't get synthetic fertilizers. Crop yields collapsed. Rice production fell 20%. A country that had been self-sufficient in food suddenly needed to import it. That required foreign currency they no longer had. Then COVID-19 shut down tourism, which was earning 4% of the country's GDP. Then the Easter bombings in 2019 scared away more tourists. Each shock compounded the last. By June 2022, Prime Minister Wickremesinghe stood in Parliament and said the words no leader wants to say: the economy has collapsed. Not struggling. Collapsed. Unable to import medicine, fuel, or food. ***, 2:15 to 3:45, ***. Here's the question nobody asked loudly enough at the time: who benefited from these decisions while they were being made? The tax cuts primarily benefited wealthy corporations and high earners. The printed money initially inflated asset prices. People with real estate and stocks saw their wealth grow on paper while wages stayed flat. The government officials making these calls weren't facing the consequences. They weren't standing in fuel lines at 4 a.m. They weren't skipping meals because rice prices had tripled. The decision to print money came from the central bank leadership. They believed, or claimed to believe, that expanding the money supply would stimulate growth. It's a theory that works under certain conditions. But Sri Lanka didn't have those conditions. The country was already dependent on imports. More money just bid up prices on goods they couldn't produce domestically. The organic farming mandate was sold as environmental policy. Maybe some officials believed it. But the implementation was ideological, not practical. No analysis of whether the country could absorb that shock. No gradual transition. Just a decree from the top. Here's what nobody in power said at the time: we don't know if this will work, and if it fails, the poorest people will starve. Asterisk asterisk, 3:45 to 5 o'clock, asterisk asterisk. The detail that changes everything, asterisk asterisk. A 2014 report from the Institute of Policy Studies specifically flagged the exact vulnerabilities that would destroy the country 8 years later. Asterisk asterisk. That report identified 3 specific risks. 1. Hot money, borrowed funds that can flee instantly when confidence drops. 2. Unsustainable borrowing practices tied to short-term projects rather than long-term development. 3. A reliance on quick fixes and surface-level solutions instead of structural reform. Every single one happened anyway. When the government came to power in 2015, they had a roadmap for what not to do. They had expert analysis. And they chose the opposite path. Not because they lacked information. Because elected officials wanted credit for immediate results, tax cuts, welfare payments, job announcements, rather than take the political pain of structural reform. Here's the systemic issue, asterisk asterisk. There was no mechanism to hold anyone accountable before the collapse happened. Asterisk asterisk. The Institute of Policy Studies published their warnings. Then what? Policymakers can ignore expert consensus with zero consequences. There's no early warning system with teeth. No mandatory review. No requirement to justify why you're ignoring a 2014 warning in 2015. By the time the crisis hit in 2022, those officials had already moved on. Some left government. Some got re-elected. The people standing in fuel lines had no way to reverse decisions made years earlier by people who faced no personal cost for being wrong. A UN report in September 2022 put it bluntly: this crisis was the result of officials' impunity for human rights abuses and economic crimes. Not just bad luck. Not just poor timing. Impunity, the freedom to cause massive harm with no legal consequences. Asterisk asterisk, 5 to 550, asterisk asterisk. Here's what this teaches us about money and power in 2024, asterisk asterisk. Expert warnings only matter if there's a mechanism to enforce them. Asterisk asterisk. We see this everywhere. Climate scientists issue reports. Economic analysts sound alarms. Then policymakers, elected officials, central bankers, corporate boards, ignore them because the personal cost of listening is higher than the political benefit of action. By the time the collapse comes, the decision-makers have moved to other jobs, other countries, other boards. Sri Lanka's crisis wasn't a natural disaster. It was a cascade of choices made by people with information, made for short-term political gain, with long-term consequences they would never face personally. That's not an outlier. That's the pattern. The second takeaway, asterisk asterisk. Countries with thin foreign reserves and high import dependence can't afford ideological economic policy. Asterisk asterisk. You don't run experiments on your currency when you're already fragile. Tax cuts, farming mandates, and money printing are gambles. They're only defensible if you have the cushion to absorb being wrong. Sri Lanka didn't. They gambled anyway. And the third, watch for when officials ignore specific, documented warnings and dismiss them as alarmism. That's usually when the real alarmism is justified. As of 2024, Sri Lanka is still restructuring its debt. Inflation is down, but poverty is up. The people who made the decision still haven't been prosecuted. This video is for educational purposes only. Not financial advice.